Hey everyone, this is Mike. Very quickly before we get into the video, spoiler warning, I'm going to be talking about and also showing gameplay of the Extreme Primal of patch 5.3, so if you don't want spoilers, if you haven't done the story yet, then this is basically your warning to click away from the video. If you're still here, then of course we're going to be jumping right into it. The main topic I wanted to talk about is the fight design behind the Seat of Sacrifices encounter, the Warrior of Light, because it's a very unique fight design that is going to keep this fight interesting for me to play for a very long time going into the future as well. Usually Extreme Primals become relatively boring at some point because they're always going to be the same, and that is going to be the case for most fights in this game. Of course, Extreme Primals have a little bit more of this issue than the rest because you can farm them as much as you want, and of course, if you're getting very unlucky with RNG, you're going to be doing them 99 times in order to get that mount. Now, when it comes down to this fight in specific, it is extremely random in the way that you get the mechanics. Now, of course, randomness in mechanics has always been there in the game. If you, for example, take a look at Shiva Savage, if you look at Light Rampant, you're going to be getting either the Orb or you're going to get Chain, and that is completely random what you get. Now, the randomness in the Warrior of Light's encounter is not necessarily in what mechanics you get targeted by, even though that is still there, but the main randomness that I want to talk about, and something that I find very enjoyable about this encounter, is the fact that the order of mechanics is very random. Now, of course, I've got about 15 clears at this point of this fight, and when it comes down to the first phase, there is a real pattern that you can see. He does all of the different mechanics scripted, always the same way in the timeline, but of course there are some alterations. Like, for example, he starts with the earth, like sword thingy first, and then it's either fire or ice, and then it's either in or out. And then the second time he does it, it is with the light one, the stack marker, and then you get the two opposite ones of the fire and ice, and the in or out that you didn't get on the first one. But then once you go into his second phase, not the add phase, after the add phase, that is where things become really random. I think I mentioned this in the guide, I'm not quite sure, but after we did 2 clears of the fight, we still hadn't seen all of the mechanics. Like, on our 3rd clear attempt, all of a sudden we saw a new mechanic and we were like, where the hell is this coming from? And I also have a feeling that as we did more and more clears of the fight, we were seeing alterations in the mechanics that we were dealing with when it came down to that second phase. And it was actually a whole lot of fun, because my main complaint sometimes about encountering Final Fantasy is that you go into the fight, you learn the rotation, eventually then you also adapt your own personal like DPS rotation to that fight, or for example, if you are a healer, you plan your healing around the mechanics as well, and then it's all just about executing that rotation, the DPS rotation, the healing rotation, the mechanical dance, and then just trying to greed as much if you want to, of course, try to go for those high percentile log runs and stuff like that. But when it comes down to just playing optimally and such, usually you just plan around the mechanical timeline that the boss has, you plan around your own DPS rotation and then the healing rotation if you're a healer, and that is pretty much it. You just try to repeat it, try to perfect that rotation, and that's pretty much all you can do with the fight. Now, when it comes down to this fight in specific, you can't really do that, because when you go into that second phase, all of a sudden he's going to be doing that Spectre of Light, of course. When he does Tank Busters, when he does the Raid Wights, when he does the sword mechanic and such, that is still all fixed, and also when he summons the Spectres, that is also fixed. But what happens when he does the Spectres? What elemental sword is he going to be using? Is it going to be in or out? Is he going to be, for example, doing a limit break 1, 2, or 3? Like, those things, I'm not quite sure if they are scripted, depending on which Spectre of Light he is going to be spawning. So that is something that I find extremely fun, because it means that you always have to be on your toes. For example, Quintuple Cast, where he does the 5 mechanics back to back, I have heard that there are 5 different patterns for it, but still, that's not necessarily something that you're immediately going to be learning on top of your head in the first 10 clears that you do, because of course in those 10 clears you might already see those 5 different patterns, and even so, during those 10 different clears you might not even see all 5 of the patterns either. As I said before, we did 2 clears and we still hadn't even seen one of the mechanics that was in the fight itself, probably because we just kind of skipped it as we cleared it really quickly. But it just goes to show you how much randomness there is in this fight. Now, of course, Warrior of Light, Seat of Sacrifice is not the first fight that does something similar like this. In the previous expansion in Stormblood, there were 2 Savage fights that also kind of entertained this idea. The first one would be 07 Savage Guardian in the Sigmascape raid series, where it would give you different pictures on the screen, and then it would load, save, paste all of the information that was there, and then you would get a different rotation of the fight. But there were basically 2 big streamlined rotations of what the boss would do. I believe there might have been some alteration going into the second phase depending on what he did first again, but it's been so long at this point that I don't know the specifics anymore. But basically there were different rotations of the mechanics that the boss has. And when we look at Alphascape 09 Savage, which was Chaos, that one also had 2 distinct rotations. Either he would start with the fire debuff, I believe it is, and then go into stone, or he would start with the water element and then go into wind, I believe it was. Not 100% sure again, but basically that was kind of what he did. But those were the 2 big rotations. He would start with one element, then you knew it would come next, and then he goes into the add phase, and then after the add phase he does the opposite 2 elements that he didn't do in the first phase. But you could also get them the other way around. Like, it doesn't mean that you always would start with fire. You could also start with water, and then after the add phase, that is when you would get the fire element, and so on. But again, once you saw the first mechanic, it was scripted for the rest of the fight. You knew where the mechanical rotation was going to head into, whereas with Warrior of Light, you don't know, and that is what I think is so much fun about this fight, and is also something that will keep it interesting for players going forward into the future when you are farming it multiple times to get weapons, to get the mount, and that kind of stuff. Because usually whenever you go into a fight, you've done it 10-20 times, you know the rotation by heart, you kind of go autopilot mode, and you start to lose maybe as much interest into the fight. Of course, what I like to do usually whenever that kicks in is I start to play different jobs. For example, yesterday I played a bunch of healer, I played a lot of Astrologian, which probably will be making a video on Astrologian tomorrow, but basically I usually tend to switch up the jobs that I play so that I need to relearn my own personal rotation towards the fight and basically get my fun from that. But in this case, I can keep playing the same job that I have been playing for the last 10 clears, and I might still have to make adjustments as we go, because all of a sudden he doesn't summon Ninja first, but maybe it's Summoner, and then on the next run he summons the White Mage and the Black Mage first, and then all of a sudden there's a Dark Knight in there as well. So we have to like get used to all of the different mechanics and then also play out the way that they work in their own timeline, and then also pay attention to all of the other stuff. Basically, you can never stop paying attention to this boss. As I said, usually whenever you clear it a bunch of times, you go autopilot modus, but you can't do that on this one because you need to remember what element is imbued into the sword. You need to like see which of the different specters he's going to be spawning, because which specter spawns when is completely random. You also need to pay attention to all of the other stuff that are going on, like for example the limit breaks that he does here or there, because those are, I believe, not scripted either. Maybe it is scripted when he uses the LBs, but I'm not quite sure if the LB that he is using is scripted either. So far, like, basically we still haven't been able to figure out what is scripted and what isn't for the most part when it comes down to the limit breaks and such, even after 15 clears. And that is just what makes it so much fun for me to do and to keep doing as well, because I always have to pay attention to what the boss is doing. It doesn't become just a autopilot fight like a lot of the other fights do in this game, and that means that I am able to just keep playing it and have a lot of fun doing so. So that's kind of all I want to talk about in today's video. I would really hope that going into the future they make more fights like this that are a whole lot more random, not necessarily in saying how many random mechanics there are when it comes down to what mechanic you get at a specific point, like for example Light Rampant, or for example Tsunami from Leviathan. That was also like, okay, what debuff do I get? But the Tsunami would still happen at the same point in time. But I would rather like something that they did here, where the mechanics themselves are random and you need to adjust on the fly to what the boss is doing and then just act accordingly and perform the mechanic in a random order rather than a scripted order. I just think that this was a whole lot of fun. So yeah, that's kind of going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about this fight if you have done it yet, if you've been having luck in Party Finder, of course, because I've heard some really good stories about it. Like, some people have been having a lot of like success clearing it in Party Finder. Others, like some of my friends, have been struggling with it quite a bit in Party Finder as well. So I've been hearing both sides of the story basically. But yeah, let me know what you think of the fight. Do you think it's fun? Do you like the randomness in it? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments down below. That rhymes, totally not intended. But yeah, anyways, that's gonna be it for me. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.